The antiseptic stench of the hospital hallway choked me as I raced toward the emergency room, terrified for my husband. He had supposedly broken his leg on a business trip, but my panic turned to ice when a nurse secretly pressed a crumpled note into my sweating palm. It read, "Check the camera." That single piece of paper shattered my 10-year marriage and started a cold war that would leave him with absolutely nothing. My name is Audrey, and the suffocating scent of bleach and stale coffee that permeated the waiting room of St. Jude Hospital was threatening to make me retch. Just 2 hours ago, I had been humming in my kitchen, preparing a welcome home dinner for my husband, Derek. He was supposed to be on a critical business trip in Detroit, closing a deal that he claimed would secure our future for the next 20 years. Then the phone rang. The voice on the other end was professional, detached, and utterly terrifying. They told me Derek had been admitted with a severe compound fracture of the femur. I drove to the hospital with tears blurring my vision, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. My mind raced with horrific scenarios. Was it a car crash? Was he mugged? I loved Derek with every fiber of my being. For 10 years, he had been my world, my anchor. The thought of him in pain was a physical knife twisting in my gut. When I finally burst into the emergency room cubicle, I expected to see relief on his face. I expected him to reach for me. Instead, as I rushed toward the bed, Derek flinched. He looked not just in pain, but annoyed. "Derek, oh my God, are you okay?" I cried out, reaching for his hand. He snatched his hand away and immediately shoved his phone under the pillow. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead, but his eyes were darting around the room, avoiding mine. "I'm fine, Audrey." "Jesus, why are you here so fast?" he snapped, his voice raspy. I told them not to call you yet. How could they not call me? "You're my husband." I tried to smooth the hair back from his forehead, but he jerked his head away. It was just a fall, slippery pavement outside the conference center. "Look, the doctor said I need absolute rest. You should go home. You can't do anything here." "I'm not leaving you. Derek, I'll stay the night in the chair." "No," he barked, too loud, causing a passing nurse to look in. He lowered his voice, wincing. "No, please. You're making me nervous. Just go home. Audrey, come back tomorrow morning." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't the reaction of a man who needed his wife, hurt and confused. I stepped out of the cubicle to get a cup of water, trying to compose myself. The corridor was bustling, but I felt entirely alone. As I stood by the water dispenser, a young nurse with tired eyes walked past me. She paused, checking the hallway, then bumped into my shoulder. It felt deliberate. Before I could apologize, I felt a piece of paper being pressed firmly into my palm. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that chilled me. They held deep pity and a warning. Then she walked away without looking back. I looked down. It was a piece of gauze wrapper, folded into a tight square. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Scrawled inside in hasty blue ink were 3 words. "Check the dash cam." My heart hammered against my ribs, a different kind of panic taking over now. Derek drove a large SUV that he insisted on equipping with a high-end dash cam that recorded both the road and the cabin interior. He usually kept it on a loop. I walked out to the parking lot. The night air was biting, but I didn't feel the cold. I found his car parked in the emergency lot where the ambulance crew must have left it, or where he parked before admission if he drove himself. No, he was brought in. But his keys were in his personal effects bag, which the nurse had pointed out to me earlier, and I had grabbed them instinctively. I unlocked the SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. It smelled of his cologne and something else, a cloying, sweet perfume that wasn't mine. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the SD card adapter twice before managing to plug it into the car's display system. I navigated to the files from this afternoon. The video appeared on the screen. It wasn't the gray highway to Detroit. It was a winding, snow-lined road leading to the Aspen Peaks ski resort, and Derek wasn't alone. Sitting in the passenger seat was Tiffany, his 24-year-old secretary. She was laughing, her hand resting intimately on Derek's thigh. "Oh, Derek, you are so bad." Tiffany giggled in the video, leaning over to nip at his ear while he was driving. "What did you tell the old ball and chain told her I'm in Detroit?" Derek laughed, the sound booming in the quiet cabin of the car. "She believes anything I say. God, I can't wait to get you on the slopes." I watched, bile rising in my throat. As the car stopped, the footage cut to the next clip. The accident hadn't happened on a sidewalk. The dashcam, which had a battery mode for parking, had captured the audio and a partial view through the windshield. Derek was trying to show off, attempting a jump on a rented snowboard right near the parking area, and landed with a sickening crunch. But it was the audio after the fall that shattered my soul. The camera was still rolling as he lay on the ground, waiting for the paramedics. I could hear his groans of agony, and then his voice, sharp and urgent despite the pain. "Tiffany, get the phone," he gasped. Don't call the old wife at home yet. Let me delete the evidence first. If she finds out, she'll ruin everything." The old wife. The words hung in the freezing air of the car. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of supporting him while he built his career, of nursing him through the flu, of paying off his student loans with my inheritance. Reduced to the old wife. The tears that had been streaming down my face stopped abruptly. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside my chest. The crushing weight of heartbreak evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. I felt a terrifying calmness wash over me. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the screen. I took out my laptop from my bag. I had brought it to do some work while waiting and inserted the SD card. I copied every single file. Then I copied them again to a cloud drive. "Delete the evidence," I whispered to the empty car. Too late. Derek. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and fixed my hair. The woman looking back at me wasn't the worried wife who had run into the hospital 20 minutes ago. Her eyes were cold, hard, and devoid of mercy. I ejected the SD card, put it in my pocket, and stepped out of the car. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent parking lot. A small, chilling smile played on my lips as I walked back toward the hospital entrance. The storm wasn't coming. I was the storm. I returned to the hospital room, composing my face into a mask of concern. Derek was furiously typing on his phone, but the moment I entered, he slid it under the sheets. He looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and irritation. "I thought I told you to go home," he grumbled, wincing as he shifted his leg. "I am going," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos swirling inside me. "I just wanted to let you know I'm heading back to the apartment to pack a bag for you. Toothbrush, fresh clothes, your charger." He relaxed visibly, clearly relieved to be rid of me so he could continue his damage control with Tiffany. "Yeah, okay, make it quick, and bring my laptop." "Of course," I replied softly. "I'll be very thorough." The drive back to our penthouse in downtown Chicago felt like an out-of-body experience. I navigated the familiar streets, but the city looked different now. It was no longer my home. It was a backdrop to a lie. When I unlocked the door to our apartment, the silence that greeted me wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I stood in the center of the living room, looking at the wedding photos on the mantel. 10 years. 10 years of memories that were now just evidence of my own blindness. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the expensive crystal vase across the room. Instead, I walked into the home office and locked the door. I dialed my lawyer's personal number. It was late, but Robert had been a friend of my father's. "Audrey, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "No." "Robert, I need you to prepare divorce papers immediately. On the grounds of adultery, I have irrefutable video evidence, I said, my voice cold and precise. I spent the next hour transferring my personal inheritance money Derek had never been able to touch into a new, secure account. Then I began to pack. I didn't take the designer bags Derek had bought me as apology gifts over the years. I didn't take the jewelry he had selected to show me off at galas. I went to the back of the closet and pulled out my old leather suitcase. Into it went the books I loved, the sweater my mother knitted before she passed, and the small wooden box containing my grandmother's keepsakes. At the bottom of that box lay a folded, yellowing document. It was the deed to Silver Hollow, a dilapidated farmhouse on 40 acres in Montana that my grandmother had left me. I remembered showing it to Derek 5 years ago. He had laughed, tossing the paper back at me. "Why do you keep that piece of trash? It's a worthless dump in the middle of nowhere. Sell it for scraps. Audrey." I ran my thumb over the paper. "Worthless," I whispered. To him, maybe. To me, it looked like a lifeboat. I made a decision then. I would not fight him for the penthouse. I would not fight for the stocks in his failing company. I wanted a clean break. If I let him think he had won the war for assets, he would sign the papers quickly. He was arrogant enough to believe he didn't need my family's money anymore. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Derek. "Where are you?" he demanded the moment I answered. "I'm starving. The hospital food is garbage. Bring me some of that chicken soup from the deli on 4th Street. I held the phone away from my ear, looking around the room one last time. "I can't do that. Derek." "What do you mean you can't? What are you doing that's so important? I'm busy." "Cleaning up the trash," I said. "What trash?" "The cleaning lady comes on Tuesday. Audrey, are you listening to me?" "Goodbye, Derek." I hung up. I took the divorce papers that Robert had just emailed me, signed them, and placed them squarely on his bedside table. On top of the papers, I placed my diamond wedding ring, and on top of the ring, I placed the crumpled note the nurse had given me. Check the dash cam. I zipped up my suitcase and walked to the door. Outside, a cold Chicago rain had begun to fall, slicking the streets with neon reflections. I stepped out of the building, the doorman nodding at me with confusion as I bypassed the waiting town car and hailed a regular taxi. As the rain hit my face, I didn't feel cold. I felt the first breath of oxygen I had taken in a decade. I was leaving everything behind, and I had never felt lighter. The divorce hearing was a blur of legal jargon and stifled yawns from the court clerk. Usually, proceedings involving significant assets like ours would drag on for months, bleeding both parties dry in legal fees. But I had instructed Robert to accept almost every demand Derek made. I wanted freedom, not a prolonged war. Derek hobbled into the courtroom on crutches, his leg still encased in a heavy plaster cast. He wore a navy suit that cost more than most people's cars, and despite his injury, he carried himself with the swagger of a conquering king. He glanced at me, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. In his eyes, I was the defeated wife, the woman running away with her tail between her legs because I couldn't handle the truth of his betrayal. Sitting in the back row was Tiffany. She shouldn't have been there. But decency was a concept she clearly didn't understand. She wore a tight pastel dress that emphasized a slight, deliberate curve in her abdomen. Every time I looked in her direction, she would place a protective hand over her stomach and smile specifically at me. A cruel, gloating gesture meant to twist the knife deeper. "Regarding the property known as Silver Hollow in Montana," Derek's lawyer stated, flipping through a thick stack of papers, "Mr. Vance is willing to relinquish all claims to this estate, provided Mrs. Vance waives her right to the Chicago penthouse and the joint stock portfolio." Derek let out a short, derisive laugh, loud enough for the judge to frown. "She can have it," Derek interrupted, not waiting for his lawyer. It's a rotting pile of wood in the middle of a wasteland. Consider it a parting gift. I'm generous like that. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, peered over her glasses at me. Mrs. Vance, do you understand that the valuation of the Montana property is significantly lower than the marital assets you are surrendering? Are you also waiving your right to spousal support? I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my simple black dress. I looked past the judge, locking eyes with the man I had wasted a decade on. I understand perfectly, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and clear in the silent room. I do not want a single cent of his money. I don't want his dirty money. Derek rolled his eyes, clearly thinking I was being dramatic. The judge sighed and stamped the final decree. So ordered. As we moved to sign the papers, Derek leaned in close to me. The smell of his expensive cologne, once comforting, now made my stomach turn. He signed his name with a flourish, then lowered his voice so only I could hear. You really are stupid, aren't you? He whispered, his breath hot against my ear. You think you're taking the moral high ground. You're going to starve out there in that God-forsaken place. You're useless without me, Audrey, a total zero. I signed my name without shaking. I didn't look at him. I didn't acknowledge the venom in his voice. I simply placed the pen down and walked away. I walked out of the double doors of the courtroom without looking back. I could hear Tiffany squealing, "Babe, we did it," followed by the sound of them celebrating their hollow victory. Outside on the courthouse steps, the wind was biting. My best friend, Claire, was pacing back and forth. When she saw me, she rushed over, grabbing my shoulders. "Audrey Robert told me what happened in there," Claire cried, her face pale with worry. "Did you really let him keep the penthouse and the investments? Are you crazy you let him take everything?" I took a deep breath of the crisp city air. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel constricted. I didn't let him take everything. Claire, I said, a small, mysterious smile playing on my lips. But you're leaving with nothing but a suitcase and a derelict farm. Claire argued. He thinks he won the lottery. I replied softly. But he doesn't know the rules of the game. The biggest asset wasn't the apartment or the stocks. It was something he never even knew existed. What are you talking about? You'll see, I said, hugging her tightly. I have a plane to catch. 2 hours later, I was seated on a commercial flight heading west. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted off, leaving the gray skyline of Chicago behind, I watched the city shrink until it was nothing but a grid of meaningless lights. I wasn't Audrey, the betrayed wife, anymore. I was heading to Montana to build something real on the ashes of the fake life I had left behind. The game had just begun. The moment my rental truck crunched over the gravel driveway of Silver Hollow, I realized Derek had been wrong about everything. He had called it a wasteland, but as I stepped out into the crisp Montana air, I saw a kingdom waiting to be awakened. The farmhouse, built from sturdy oak 100 years ago, was indeed weathered, its paint peeling like sunburned skin, but it stood proud against a backdrop of rolling hills and wild, overgrown fields that smelled faintly of lavender. It wasn't a ruin. It was a sleeping beauty. I didn't waste a single day. For the first time in years, I dusted off my degree in architecture, a part of myself I had suppressed to be Derek's trophy wife. I sketched plans late into the night, envisioning not just a home, but an eco-luxury retreat that honored the land rather than conquering it. I hired a local contractor, a man named Sam with calloused hands and a skepticism that quickly turned to respect. "You sure about this?" Ma'am Sam asked on the first day, kicking a rotting beam on the porch. "This is going to cost a pretty penny and, well, it's a lot of work for one woman." "I'm not just one woman." "Sam," I replied, tying my hair back with a piece of twine. "I'm an architect, and I have nothing but time. Let's get to work." As we tore down the decaying drywall in the basement a week later, We stumbled upon a heavy wooden door hidden behind a stack of old crates. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the scent of oak and fermented grapes. Rows of dust-covered barrels lined the walls, and on a workbench lay a leather-bound journal my grandmother's handwriting, detailing secret family wine recipes I thought had been lost to time. "Well, I'll be damned," Sam whispered, running a hand over a barrel. "This here is liquid gold if it hasn't turned to vinegar." It hadn't. It was complex, rich, and utterly unique. I threw myself into the community. The people here were rough-hewn and honest, a stark contrast to the plastic smiles and backstabbing whispers of Chicago's high society. I bought produce from the neighbors, learned how to fix a fence, and in turn, they helped me harvest the wild lavender and rehabilitate the old vines. 6 months later, Silver Legacy was born. We launched a line of organic lavender products and a limited run of the vintage wine found in the cellar. The response was immediate. One afternoon, a silver sedan pulled up the driveway. A man in a sharp but casual suit stepped out. He introduced himself as Marcus, an investor from Seattle who had tasted my wine at a local fair. "I have to be honest," Marcus said, looking around at the renovated guest cabins that blended seamlessly into the tree line. "I came for the wine, but this place, it's extraordinary. The design, the atmosphere, it's exactly what people are starving for right now." "It's a place to heal," I said, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. "I want in," Marcus said, looking me dead in the eye. "Exclusive distribution for the wine. And I want to put this resort on the map. We'll target the high-end market in the Pacific Northwest. On one condition," I replied firmly. "My name stays out of it. Use a pseudonym for the owner. I value my privacy." Marcus smiled. "Done." As the months turned into a year, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The pale, anxious wife who flinched at her husband's tone was gone. In her place was a woman with sun-bleached hair and skin tanned by the mountain sun. My muscles were hard from physical labor, and my eyes shone with a fierce, quiet confidence. News of the Silver Legacy retreat began to appear in travel magazines, described as a hidden gem run by the mysterious V. Thorne. I read the articles with a satisfied smirk, sipping coffee on my porch. Just then, a shaggy, three-legged sheepdog hobbled up the steps and rested his head on my knee. I had found him abandoned on the highway and named him Trip. Derek would have kicked him away, complaining about the fur and the smell. "Who's a good boy?" "Trip," I cooed, scratching him behind the ears. Trip barked happily, his tail thumping against the floorboards. I took a deep breath of the lavender-scented air. I had built a paradise out of a wreckage, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to be happy. I was free. While I was breathing fresh mountain air and building a legacy, Derek was slowly suffocating in the vacuum I had left behind. Back in Chicago, the glass castle he thought he owned was turning into a prison. He had always dismissed my job as a hobby, but he was learning the hard way that my income had been the silent engine keeping his luxury lifestyle afloat. The maintenance fees for the penthouse alone were over $3,000 a month, and without me there to manage the budget, the bills were piling up like snowdrifts. Tiffany, the woman he had blown up his life for, was revealing her true colors. She wasn't the adventurous, carefree spirit he had met on the ski slopes. She was a bottomless pit of need. Instead of a warm home and a hot dinner, Derek came home every night to a messy apartment scattered with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. "Where is dinner?" Derek asked one evening, tripping over a pile of shoeboxes in the hallway. "I've been working for 12 hours. Tiffany, the least you could do is order takeout if you're not going to cook." Tiffany didn't even look up from her phone, where she was scrolling through Instagram. "I'm not your maid." "Derek, besides, my back hurts. The baby is really taking a toll on me today." The baby. That was another ticking time bomb. Tiffany's stomach remained suspiciously flat for someone who claimed to be entering her second trimester. The truth was, there was no baby. It had been a desperate lie to force the divorce, and now she was trapped in her own deception, frantically looking for a way to stage a miscarriage without medical records. Derek's professional life was collapsing just as fast as his personal one. His distraction and erratic behavior after the accident hadn't gone unnoticed. With the economy tightening, his firm was looking to trim the fat, and Derek, who used to be the golden boy, was now a liability. "We're moving you to the back office, Vance," his boss had told him, dropping a file on his desk. "You've missed 3 major deadlines. Your head isn't in the game. Take a pay cut, or take a hike." He took the cut, a humiliation that burned him to his core. But Tiffany didn't care about his demotion. She only cared about her image. She was obsessed with the idea of a century wedding to cement her status and rub it in the faces of everyone who whispered that she was just a homewrecker. "I want the platinum package at the Sapphire Lake Resort," Tiffany demanded, throwing a glossy brochure onto the coffee table. "And I want a custom dress from Paris. It has to be perfect. Derek, everyone is waiting for us to fail. We have to show them we're royalty. Tiffany, that venue costs $50,000 just to open the doors," Derek pleaded, running his hands through his thinning hair. "I'm tapped out. I'm already leveraging the condo to pay off your credit card debt." "Figure it out," she shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "You promised me the world. Don't tell me you're broke. Or I'm walking out that door right now, terrified of losing the only thing he had left." Derek caved. He went to a predatory lender and took out a second mortgage on the apartment, convinced that the wedding gifts from his wealthy connections would be enough to pay it back. It was a gambler's fallacy, born of desperation. Late at night, while Tiffany slept with her back to him, clutching her new designer purse like a teddy bear, Derek would go to the kitchen to make a sandwich. He would stand there in the cold light of the refrigerator, remembering the roast chicken and rosemary potatoes I used to make. He remembered how I would massage his shoulders after a long day, how the house always smelled of lemon and peace. Now, it smelled of stale perfume and resentment. He tried to bring my name up once, in a moment of weakness. Audrey never asked for things like this, he muttered during an argument about floral arrangements. Tiffany spun around, her eyes blazing with irrational jealousy. "Don't you dare say her name, she's a loser. Derek, a boring, frigid loser. I am the best thing that ever happened to you. Check my phone. Check my messages if you don't believe I could have anyone I want." She forced him to unlock his phone so she could scroll through his texts, deleting any contact that seemed female. She was isolating him, cutting off his lifelines. In a final twist of irony, Derek sought out the most exclusive venue in the suburbs to satisfy Tiffany's vanity. He wanted to prove he was still a big shot. He reached out to the Grand Oak Estate, a venue known for its exclusive wine list and high society clientele. He didn't know that the estate had just signed an exclusive partnership with a new, buzzy supplier from Montana. He signed the contract, his hand shaking as he committed money he didn't have, thinking he was buying his dignity back. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant, right on the dotted line of a contract that would bring him face to face with the past he thought he had buried. The peace of my morning walk through the vineyard was shattered by the vibrating phone in my pocket. It was Claire, and she didn't waste a second on pleasantries. "You are not going to believe the audacity of this man," Claire hissed into the phone, her voice shaking with second-hand rage. "Derek is inviting the entire alumni network to this wedding. He's desperate to look like he's on top of the world." I chuckled, plucking a ripe grape from the vine. Let him play his games. Claire, it doesn't matter to me anymore. It should. He's trying to rewrite history. Claire argued. I hung up, shaking my head. But the universe had a strange way of aligning the stars. An hour later, I received an urgent email from Marcus, my distributor in Seattle. He was ecstatic about a massive order for a high-profile VIP wedding at the Grand Oak Estate outside Chicago. He wanted to know if we could supply 300 bottles of our most exclusive reserve. I opened the attachment to view the client details. The name stared back at me in bold, black letters: Groom Derek Vance, Bride Tiffany Stone. I felt a cold smirk spread across my face. They wanted the best wine in the country to prove their status, and they had unknowingly come knocking on my door. "Marcus," I said, calling him immediately. "Approve the order. But I want to use the special reserve from the 24 batch, the one we labeled Bitter Truth. It has a very distinct aftertaste." "Are you sure Marcus asked? That's a bold name for a wedding wine." "Trust me," I replied. "It's perfect for the occasion." That evening, a black limousine rolled up the dusty driveway of Silver Hollow. My uncle, Arthur Thorne, stepped out. I hadn't seen him in years. He was a reclusive billionaire who preferred the shadows to the spotlight, but he had always had a soft spot for me. He looked out of place in the rustic setting, wearing a suit that cost more than my tractor. "Uncle Arthur," I smiled, hugging him. "To what do I owe the honor I heard about what that little rat did to you?" Arthur said, his voice gravelly and dangerous. "I don't like it when people mess with my family. Audrey." So I did a little digging. We sat on the porch, and Arthur laid a manila folder on the table. Inside were financial reports that made my eyes widen. "Derek is drowning," Arthur explained, tapping a finger on a red column of numbers. "He's leveraged everything. And that girl? Tiffany. She's a piece of work. I found records of her meeting an ex-boyfriend last week. She borrowed $5,000 from him because Derek's credit cards are maxed out. And the baby I asked, dreading the answer." "There never was a baby," Arthur said flatly. "My investigator found out she staged a fall down a flight of stairs at a shopping mall last week. She claimed it caused a miscarriage. It was all a show to get out of the lie before the pregnancy started showing. Or rather, didn't start showing. I felt sick. Does Derek know? The idiot is so guilty he's buying her diamond earrings on credit to apologize for his clumsy gene that he thinks caused the accident. He's completely under her thumb." Arthur leaned back, lighting a cigar. "I'm going to that wedding. Audrey. I secured an invite as a potential investor for his failing logistics firm. He thinks I'm his savior." "Why waste your time?" I asked. "I just want to stay here and watch the fireworks from a distance." "No," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You need to be there, not to make a scene, but to exist, to let them see what they threw away. If you hide, they think they won. If you stand there, shining like a diamond while their house of cards falls, that is true revenge." He was right. I looked at the rolling hills of my sanctuary, then back at the file. It was time to close the book properly. "I don't have anything to wear," I whispered, a nervous flutter in my chest. Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin. I took the liberty of bringing something. "Go look in the car." I walked to the limo and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was a dress of deep, shimmering emerald silk, cut to perfection. It wasn't a dress for a grieving ex-wife. It was a dress for a queen. "Okay," I said, turning back to Arthur, my voice steady. "Let's go toast to the happy couple." I stood in the shadowed alcove of the upper mezzanine, concealed by heavy velvet curtains, watching the circus unfold below. The grand oak estate had been transformed into a spectacle of wealth that bordered on the grotesque. Thousands of white orchids, imported all the way from South America, cascaded from the ceiling, their sickly sweet scent unable to mask the stench of desperation that permeated the room. It was a display of opulence meant to scream success, but to me, it just looked like a frantic attempt to cover up a bankruptcy. Derek stood near the entrance, greeting guests. He was wearing a tuxedo that likely cost $5,000. Yet, he looked like a man marching to the gallows. His face was gaunt, his eyes darting around the room not with joy, but with panic. Every time a guest entered, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, immediately launching into a pitch. I could see his lips moving, undoubtedly talking about synergy and new horizons, trying to secure a contract to save his drowning company before the appetizers were even served. Beside him, Tiffany looked like a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. Her custom-made lace gown was stunning. I had to admit, but her body language betrayed her. She wasn't glowing. She was vibrating with anxiety. Her eyes kept flickering toward the security guards at the back, clearly terrified that one of her many creditors or perhaps a scorned ex-lover might burst through the doors to demand payment. "They look like they are at a funeral, not a wedding," a voice whispered near the bar below. I heard half the board of directors declined the invite. Another guest muttered, sipping champagne, "Derek is finished. This is just his last hurrah." Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. My uncle, Arthur, walked through the main doors. He didn't need to shout to command attention. His presence alone was enough. The staff, recognizing a true titan of industry, practically bowed as they took his coat. Derek's eyes widened. He abandoned the couple he was talking to and practically ran across the marble floor to greet him. He had no idea that the man he was rushing toward was my flesh and blood, the brother of the mother-in-law he had never bothered to visit. "Mr. Thorne," Derek exclaimed, extending a hand that I knew was sweaty. I am so honored you could make it." When I heard a representative from Silver Legacy was coming, I didn't expect the CEO himself. Arthur looked at Derek's hand for a second before shaking it briefly, his expression unreadable. "Well, Mr. Vance, we take our investments very seriously. I wanted to see for myself what kind of man runs this operation." "You won't be disappointed," Derek stammered, guiding Arthur toward the VIP table. "We are restructuring, poised for massive growth. I would love to discuss the numbers with you later." Tiffany, spotting a new target, slinked over. She looped her arm through Arthur's, batting her eyelashes in a way that made my stomach turn. "Oh, you must be the mysterious investor Derek told me about," she purred, looking Arthur up and down. "I love a man with experience. You must have such fascinating stories about your wealth." Arthur gently but firmly removed her arm from his, dusting off his suit sleeve as if he had touched something unclean. "My wealth is the least interesting thing about me, Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, his voice dripping with a polite disdain that flew right over her head. "I prefer to talk about integrity. It is a much rarer currency these days." Tiffany blinked, confused, but forced a giggle. "Oh, you are so funny." As everyone took their seats, the waiters began to pour the wine. The dark, ruby liquid swirled into the crystal glasses. It was my wine, the Bitter Truth Reserve from Silver Hollow. A hush fell over the room as the guests took their first sip. Eyes widened. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. It was complex, earthy, with a finish that lingered on the tongue. "This is incredible," a major client at the next table said loud enough for Derek to hear. "Vance, where on earth did you get this?" Derek puffed out his chest, his earlier anxiety momentarily forgotten as he basked in the unearned praise. "Glad you like it," Derek announced, raising his glass, completely oblivious to the label facing him. "I had it flown in specially. Only the best for my friends. I have a nose for quality, you know." Up on the balcony, I gripped the velvet curtain, suppressing a dark laugh. He was toasting his own destruction with the fruits of the labor he had called garbage. The trap was set, the players were in position, and Derek had just taken the first sip of his own poison. I remained hidden in the alcove, gripping the velvet curtain as the speeches began. Derek stood center stage, the spotlight reflecting off his sweating forehead. He held the microphone with a white-knuckled grip, launching into a rehearsed monologue that was so thick with lies it was hard to breathe. "When I met Tiffany," Derek announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "I knew my life was about to change. She is the most selfless woman I have ever known. She stood by me when I had nothing. That is true love." A ripple of awkward silence moved through the room. Everyone knew Tiffany had only appeared when Derek was at his peak and was currently spending money he didn't have. I saw a few of his old college friends exchange confused glances. And now? Derek continued, raising a glass of my wine. We start a new chapter. A wealthy chapter. Before he could continue his delusion, Uncle Arthur stood up from the VIP table. He didn't ask for permission. He simply commanded the room's attention. "If I may," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the feedback of the microphone. "As a representative of the company fueling this celebration, I would like to offer a toast." Derek looked thrilled. He practically tripped over himself to hand the microphone to Arthur, thinking this was the public endorsement that would save his career. "Please, everyone, this is Mr. Thorne, a visionary investor." Arthur took the stage, towering over Derek. He held up a bottle of the Bitter Truth Reserve. "This wine," Arthur began, turning the bottle so the light caught the dark glass. "It is rare. It is resilient. It was crafted by a woman who was told she was worthless, a woman who was discarded like trash." Derek's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his eyes. Arthur gestured to the AV team. "She built something from the wreckage. Let me show you." The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a loop of Derek and Tiffany's studio photos, suddenly flickered. A high-definition drone shot appeared. It soared over rolling hills of vibrant purple lavender, circling a magnificent, restored oak manor that glowed with warm, golden light against the Montana sunset. The image shifted to the interior, a wine cellar filled with barrels, a tasting room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and guests enjoying five-star service. A collective gasp went through the audience. "My God!" A woman in the front row whispered, "Where is that? It's breathtaking." Derek turned to look at the screen, and I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. He knew that roofline. He knew the shape of the porch. It was the garbage property he had thrown at me during the divorce settlement. That's Silver Hollow," Derek whispered, the microphone picking up his trembling voice. "That's impossible." "It is Silver Hollow," Arthur confirmed, his voice cold as steel. "And the owner of this empire is my niece. She took the worthless land you gave her and turned it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise." That was my cue. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. The emerald silk dress flowed around me like liquid armor. I wasn't the woman who had cried in a hospital parking lot. I held my head high, my shoulders back, radiating a power that sucked the air out of the room. The crowd parted for me, heads turning, whispers erupting like wildfire. Is that Audrey?" someone asked in disbelief. I walked straight toward the stage. Tiffany, who had been sitting at the head table, stood up. Her face was a mask of pure horror. She looked from the screen to me, realizing that the woman she had mocked was the one supplying the very wine she was drinking. "You," Tiffany gasped. Her hand went limp. The crystal flute she was holding slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor with a sharp crash, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed in the stunned silence. Red wine splashed onto the hem of her white wedding dress, staining it like a fresh wound. I didn't look at her. I stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at Derek. He looked small. He looked broken. I reached out and took a glass of wine from a passing waiter's tray. I raised it toward him, a small, pitying smile playing on my lips. "Hello, Derek," I said, my voice clear and steady without a microphone. "Congratulations on the wedding, and thank you. Thank you for discarding me. If you hadn't, I never would have realized that I was the diamond, and you were just the stone holding me down." Derek stood frozen on the edge of the stage, his eyes darting between the magnificent estate on the screen and me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He didn't see his ex-wife standing there. He saw a winning lottery ticket. The shock on his face melted into a sickening, desperate hope. He scrambled down the stairs, ignoring his injured leg, and rushed toward me with arms wide open. Audrey baby Derek cried out, his voice cracking. I knew you were capable of this. We can work this out. I made a mistake. But he never reached me. 2 of Arthur's personal security guards, built like mountains, stepped forward and blocked his path. Derek slammed into them, bouncing back like a child running into a wall. Don't touch her, Arthur commanded, his voice booming over the sound system. And save your energy. Mr. Vance, you're going to need it for my second wedding gift. Arthur clicked a button on a remote. The image of my beautiful estate vanished, replaced by a stark, scanned document projected onto the massive screen. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank, dated this very morning. This is a seizure order for the assets of Vance Logistics and your personal penthouse, Arthur announced calmly to the room. You are not just broke, Derek. You are $3 million in debt. Your company is being liquidated as we speak. A collective gasp went through the room. The wealthy investors and partners who had been shaking Derek's hand minutes ago recoiled as if he were contagious. They pulled out their phones, canceling meetings and blocking his number right in front of him. No, that's a lie. It's a clerical error, Derek shrieked, looking around wildly. But the nightmare wasn't over. The double doors swung open with a violent bang. A sharp-faced woman in a trench coat marched in, fury radiating from her in waves. It was not a guest. Tiffany Stone, the woman screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the bride. You little thief. You think you can sleep with my husband, borrow $20,000 for a medical emergency, and then disappear. Tiffany turned pale, shrinking back against the head table. I don't know who you are, liar, the woman yelled, throwing a stack of medical records into the air. They fluttered down like confetti. You told him you needed money for an abortion, but these records from the clinic prove you were never pregnant. It was all a scam. The room erupted. The guests were no longer polite observers. They were an audience at a car crash. Phones were raised, capturing every second of the humiliation. Derek spun around to face Tiffany. His face turned a deep, violent red. The vein in his neck looked ready to burst. You lied to me, Derek roared, advancing on his bride. You said you were the daughter of a tech tycoon. You said the baby died. Tiffany realized she was cornered. The mask of the sweet, victimized girl dropped instantly, revealing the jagged edges underneath. She threw her bouquet at him. And you said you were a millionaire? Tiffany screamed back, her voice shrill and ugly. I only married you because I thought you could pay off my debts. You're just a broke loser with a limp. I should have stayed with the bartender. You gold-digging witch. Derek lunged at her. You pathetic failure, she shrieked, clawing at his face. It was chaos. The bride and groom were shoving each other on the stage, screaming obscenities that echoed through the expensive sound system. The expensive wedding cake was knocked over in the scuffle, crashing to the floor in a heap of fondant and ruined dreams. I stood at the back of the room next to Uncle Arthur, watching the live stream on a guest's phone screen. It was a grotesque, violent end to a relationship built on lies. Shall we go? Arthur asked quietly, offering me his arm. Yes, I replied, turning my back on the screaming, the flashing cameras, and the 2 people who had tried to destroy me. They were tearing each other apart, and I didn't need to lift a finger. The show is over. The spectacle inside the ballroom reached its pathetic crescendo not with a bang, but with the beep of a credit card terminal. The banquet manager, a man who had been sweating nervously for the last hour, finally lost his patience. He marched onto the stage, interrupting the screaming match between the bride and groom, and cut the microphone. "Mister," Vance the manager shouted, his voice cracking with stress. "We just tried to run the final payment for the catering and the venue rental. The card has been declined. We need $50,000 immediately, or I am calling the police for theft of services." The silence that followed was deafening. The guests, who had been live streaming the drama, zoomed in on Derek's face. He looked like a man who had just been told the world was ending. He patted his pockets frantically, pulling out wallet after wallet, but he knew they were all empty. The bank seizure Uncle Arthur had initiated was immediate. Derek looked at the angry manager, then at Tiffany, who was holding her torn dress together. And finally, his eyes landed on me. He didn't see his ex-wife. He saw a lifeline. He scrambled down the stairs, limping heavily on his bad leg, and threw himself to his knees at the edge of the dance floor. It was a humiliating display, stripping away the last shreds of his dignity. Audrey, please," Derek wailed, tears streaming down his face mixed with sweat. "You have to help me. You have millions." "Now, 50,000 is nothing to you. We were married for 10 years. Audrey, 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Don't let them take me to jail." The room held its breath. I looked down at him, but the anger I expected to feel wasn't there. There was no rage, no heat. There was only a profound, distant pity, like looking at a bug trapped in a jar of its own making. 10 years, I repeated softly, my voice carrying in the silent room. "Derek, that love died the moment you told me not to check the dash cam. You didn't just break your leg that day. You broke the only person who would have stood by you through this mess. But I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he sobbed, reaching a hand out toward me. I took a step back, avoiding his touch. "I know you are, but you're not sorry you hurt me. You're just sorry you got caught. Goodbye, Derek." I turned my back on him. I heard him scream my name one last time, a desperate, broken sound. But I kept walking. Arthur placed a protective hand on my back as we exited the grand double doors. Behind us, the chaos erupted again as the manager began shouting orders to his staff to lock the doors and call the authorities. We stepped out into the cool night air. The valet brought the car around, and as we drove away toward the airport, I watched the lights of the Grand Oak Estate fade into the distance. I was leaving behind a disaster that was no longer my responsibility to fix. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, the news cycle had chewed them up and spit them out. Derek filed for personal bankruptcy. He was fired from his job for gross misconduct and is currently working double shifts at a warehouse to pay off his debts. Tiffany didn't stick around to support him. She fled the state the night of the wedding. Last I heard, there was a warrant out for her arrest regarding multiple counts of credit card fraud and identity theft. But their story is no longer part of mine. I returned to Montana, to the crisp air and the honest work of Silver Hollow. The first harvest of the season was approaching, and the vineyard was alive with activity. I spent my days in the fields and my evenings designing new cabins for the resort. I found peace in the rhythm of nature, a happiness that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. One afternoon, as I was inspecting the lavender rose, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I saw the news. "You did well." I knew immediately who it was, the nurse from St. Jude Hospital, the woman who had handed me the note that saved my life. I smiled, typing nothing back. I didn't need to reopen that door. I simply pressed delete. The past was finally, truly dead. I stood there for a long time, the purple waves of lavender stretching out to the horizon. The wind whipped my hair across my face, carrying the scent of earth and freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet air of the life I had built with my own 2 hands. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a wife. I was the architect of my own destiny, and for the first time in forever, the future looked beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Derek's karma. Did he get what he deserved? Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.